Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Wherever you are, thank you for being here. Where we are is gathered on the ancestral, unceded, and traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations here in Vancouver at the BMO Theatre Centre on the Goldcorp stage. And I'm here with this year's members of the Emerging Playwrights Unit, Cohort. So the Arts Club designed this program called the Emerging Playwrights Unit as a way to gather promising and exciting young playwrights together for a year, to spend a year together writing a play. And we selected playwrights who are in the early stages of their careers and who have a process already in place. So the unit's not about teaching people how to write plays. The premise is that they already know how to write plays, but that they're in the early stages of their careers. Writing a play is, for the most part, a rather solitary experience, but what a unit does is that it puts them together as a cohort for a year, and they spend that time each writing their individual plays, but checking in with each other like once a month and sharing their work periodically, which is something that's not normally part of a playwright's process. And it's a way of getting feedback, getting encouragement, and getting support from their peers. So we have these four playwrights, and this is the second year we've done this. So we have these four fantastic, exciting young playwrights with us. So we're going to meet them right now. So I invite you all to introduce yourselves and also tell us a little bit about your writing, or more specifically, what's important to you in your writing. Or to put it another way, why do you write? Who'd like to go first?
Hi, since I'm the youngest, I'll go first. So my name is Justin Neal. I am a settler on this land, although I am also Squamish, a member of the Squamish Nation. My grandmother grew up here in North Van and moved down to the States back in the 40s, and I immigrated this way. So it's an honor to be on Squamish territory, to be part of this group. And the why am I a writer, I guess, is what.
Yeah, what is it? What's important to you in your writing?
Yeah, when I first started writing again, so I was a playwright when I was younger, and then I stopped for a long time, and life happened, and life was happening, and then when I came back to it a few years ago, I really needed it as a kind of a therapeutic. I was doing it as a therapeutic thing to sort of get through some demons in my life, and I've since sort of used writing as a way to tell stories from my perspective that I simply want to see on the screen, and that right now happens to be Indigenous characters and storylines in a contemporary setting, not set back in, the past. So that's kind of where, once I felt that I could start, I was a decent writer, then I started to envision stories that's where I am right now, is really trying to bring as many Indigenous folks into the story as possible, and starting from a place of like my own story and where that comes from.
And what's the name of the piece that you're working on during the unit?
It's called The Traveler.
Fantastic. We'll get into what the plays are individually later, but just for the titles. Who's next?
I'll go.
Good.
We'll go
in order.
Or maybe not.
One.
Maybe not in order. My name is Pippa Mackie. Why do I write?
Yeah. What is it about, what's important in your writing?
We talked a little bit about this before, but I feel like for me, it comes from a place of wanting to correct unfairnesses in the world, in particular things with a feminist lens, and also to reclaim things that that I feel like need a new story perspective. And I like to do it through comedy, in particular dark comedy, where it's exploring something like deeply troubling or serious, and then I like to go as far down as I can to then unearth something funny. Yeah, but in general, I write from a place of anger a lot, actually. When I'm writing, sometimes I'm just like sitting there and I'm feeling frustrated, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, it's because I have something I need to say.
Do you get it out in the play?
What do you mean?
Like, did you get that anger out by writing?
Yes,
Yeah.
it definitely helps. It helps because I think for me when I was younger, it used to be journal writing was how I kind of like thought about something, and once it was on the page, it wasn't as scary. It wasn't like just in my head. So I think now as an adult, I think that's where I put a lot of my frustrations. And I think because I like sometimes think my own frustrations are trivial or silly, and so I think that's where some of the comedy comes from. And then the deeper stuff requires more, or the really like troubling stuff that I write about requires a bit more research in order to unearth some of the comedy in it.
I just read a quote that said that writing is thinking. You know, and that way we write to process.
Yeah,
It's very interesting.
I think so. Because sometimes I think I know what I'm gonna write, and then I write it, and it's like totally different.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Case in point of your play, which is now named, what's it named now?
Hurricane Mona.
It used to be called,
It used to be called Protest Pie.
but it's changed. We'll
Yeah.
get to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Hi, my name is Lili Robinson. I'm of mixed race ancestry, so on the one side, I'm of European descent and my family are settlers, and on the other, I'm of African descent, and so my family were brought here as stolen people as part of the African, or the transatlantic slave trade. So part of my work, I feel right now, is figuring out how to be an artist on stolen land, and coming from both stolen people and settlers, and seeing what it means to be of those things and to be here right now. Why I write, I've always written. It's like Pippa was saying, certainly to process. That's my main way. I process my emotions and the world. Poetry has always been my sort of primary writing point, and playwriting has been more recent. And yeah, for me, it is really, I mean, a lot of my work so far is rooted in autobiography, and so it's still a lot of processing and unpacking my own shit. But I really do believe in, it's a Black feminist ethic that the personal is political,
Yes.
right? And so I do really believe in that, and that through telling my story and the stories of the communities I come from, that I'm doing a larger work at the same time, just through my own specific lens.
Right.
And yeah, and that's important to me, like Justin was saying, you know, bringing the stories of where we come from to the stage, and especially when there's stories that haven't been told on Canadian stages as much. They're not what we think of when we think of Western theatre. It's important to me to disrupt that and to hopefully create meaningful conversation out of what I bring to the stage.
By primarily what it sounds like, a personal exploration of identity. Like, it sounds very personal, but also very global, I suppose. I mean, I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but that's what it sounds like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
more or less, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say that's right.
You're trained as an actor too, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I went to theater school and had no time to write. Usually I write all the time, again, just my own as processing. And I didn't really while I was in theater school, but by the end I realized as much as I loved acting, what I really loved was getting to create my own work and having the space to also bring physical theater, which is really important to me, into the work as well. And so yeah, like I went to Studio 58, and so you do a solo show at the end, and that process, I was like, this is the thing. This is the being able to create from my point of view, from my desires to explore form and create weird new things.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great, awesome. Erik.
Hi, I'm Erik Gow, and the reason I write is because I'm uncomfortable when I don't have some project to do. I'm started out in acting. Lili and I both went to the same school at Studio 58. I had a background in music before that. I've always done music. Probably the earliest writing I did was satire songs. I was a huge Weird Al fan as a child growing up. So I would constantly hear songs, and then I would hear alternatives in my head. And even now, coming to the question, because I don't think about that question of why do I write. I think about why am I writing a certain piece, but not necessarily why I'm writing. But what I do a lot is I adapt things. And as a writer, it's funny, I love storytelling, and I started approaching the arts through acting, and then as I did more of that, and then I was looking for other jobs and things to sort of fill in those gaps, I would take lots of teaching jobs, and a lot of the things I would do is write for kids. So I would write these little adaptations of children's stories, I would write these summer camp things, I would write all of these sort of different stories, and it would usually come back to adaptation. So for me, it's, I will often, instead of writing what I know, interesting, I'll write what I don't know, which usually it comes from a question. So my solo show that I did at Studio, which was probably the first play I wrote, which was then developed into a 2-act play, was all based on the presidency of the United States, and if a woman or if a gay man were the president of the United States, what would they call their partner? If there was a male partner to the president. So I was like, oh my goodness. And I saw this interview with Barbara Walters.
So like First Lady instead of First Lady.
Yeah, so the play was called First Lady. And Barbara Walters asked Hillary Clinton on the New Year's special, like, oh, what would they call Bill? And she said, oh, I don't know. And I thought, what? How do you not know? And then I was like, what? What would they call him? And I couldn't stop thinking about that. And the show that I'm adapting right now for the Arts Club is a adaptation of Death Takes a Holiday, which is an adaptation of an adaptation, and I've seen an adaptation of that and an adaptation of that. So I'm kind of lost in all of these adaptations. I don't know which one I'm adapting now.
And it's a musical.
And it's a musical. So I'm combining other knowledge that I have. But the idea for this came to me because we had to do these things in school called play projects, where you would take an old play, you'd read it, and you'd analyze it, and then someone had censored it, so they put blanks through all of references to sex, drugs, alcohol, fun, and then I went, whoa, what would this play be without that? Or if you focused on that most of all. So I took that, and now I'm setting Death Takes a Holiday with teenagers, and them exploring death and mortality. And for me, I guess where I'm starting to find the links in to write what I know is I spent a whole childhood being sick and deal with chronic illness, and it's so I'm starting to find the things like, what are the things that scare me? So I think of sort of my youth and mortality and all of these things, and I'm really excited by this project to get to write something and explore such a taboo subject that you don't really get to talk about, which this entire play is about, but then also the person who censored that play just had problems with sex and alcohol and everything else, and I went, well, that's weird. So, yeah, I want to write a play about all the things I don't like talking about.
Great, fantastic. Lili, forgive me, we jumped over, I forgot to ask you the title of your...
I also forgot to say it. The title of my piece is Infest.
Infest. We'll get back to that as well. Before we came, I was listening to an interview with Timberlake Wertenbaker, who's a British playwright. She's been writing for 40 years. And the interviewer said, so tell me what your writing day is like. What do you do to write? What's your day like? And she was very sweet. She said, well, I get up at 7 a.m., I have breakfast, I stroke my cat, and I have a coffee, and then I climb the stairs to my office, and I sit at my desk, and I panic.
She what?
She panics.
Panic.
She just sits there and panics. That's her writing process. So I would like to ask you to tell us about your writing process. outside the cohort, let's imagine like before we've joined the unit, because we'll talk about how your process has been affected by the unit. So what does your writing day look like? Do you just write on scraps of paper at the bar? Or do you sit down for 8 hours a day at your computer?
I'll
in.
go.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that it's mine has evolved to actually being kind of structured. So but because of COVID, it hasn't. It's been a struggle to get back to that. But for a good couple years, it was if I didn't have to go to a job, which is ideal. But let's say I don't, and that's maybe, that's part of the struggle, is to try to find a way to focus on writing and not have to show up to a job. Let's say that happens, then I'm able to wake up, have coffee, and hopefully do a couple hours worth of work trying to figure out that I've left. And then I can't do anything more, and then I have to eat, then I have to walk, and I have to think from about noon until 6, let's say, and then if I'm lucky, I can then work another 3, 4, 5 hours, maybe later. And that's kind of what my days are like. It's morning, bunch of stuff, coffee's fueled, I hit a dead end, I think my life is over, it fucking sucks, I go for a walk, I'm like, God, what am I doing? And then the second half, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. And then, I work and hopefully a bit at night.
And that's probably a regular thing.
That's
you don't learn to go, oh, I went through this yesterday and I learned that it wasn't so bad. It's still gonna be,
It's kind of the groundhog-ish day.
You guys?
I'll do the next one. I instead of writing, I generally do everything else before writing. So if there's something out of balance in the home, I'll be like, oh, well, I gotta do the laundry. Can't write unless I do the laundry.
Is that procrastinating?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Procrastinating. That's what I call it.
Procrastinating.
Yeah.
Procrastinating, dog walking, crap. It's like I have a genuine anxiety when it comes to the writing aspect of it.
Why?
Jeez, I don't. Like, if I knew that,
Are you afraid you're going to write something bad so you don't?
No, I haven't written enough bad shit to be good yet. Like, I know this. Like, I know that I gotta write a bunch of shit.
That's awesome.
Before it's like, oh, well, that's how that works.
Right.
It's this weird thing where I spend so much time, I love research. That's a problem. I love research. It's like an addiction.
Right.
I love finding, like that match stuff. I was talking earlier about Fosse Jaw. Look it up. Where I'm doing like a Christmas Carol adaptation right now, and then I go, well, he needs a match. How much would a match be in Victorian England? I take out the books and I'm going through, and then I learn all of this other stuff.
You go down a spiral.
Yeah, and you go down a spiral, and it feels so good to learn knowledge. And then, like, the actual writing it down is terrifying because it's like, this isn't as interesting as Fosse Jaw. I should write a book about Fosse Jaw now. And then I'm going to write a play about that, and I get sidetracked. Or the other day I finally got down to writing, and then my final draft wouldn't open, so I had to call the line and spend hours doing that. It's this self-deprecating awfulness. Where it's finding moments of the day and it's like beating myself into submission. And I like to think that I'll be like, my education as a writer is actually just going to be actually sitting my ass down long enough to write. Because you show it to someone, they're like, oh yeah, that's good. And I go, no, it's crap. And it's like, ugh.
So we have self-doubt, procrastination. What do you want to throw on that pile?
I mean, it's good to hear that other people spend as much
know, it does
time
feel- it does-
like
yeah.
struggling to actually sit at the computer as I did when like a
Totally.
deadline is coming or whatever.
Yeah.
I remember seeing an Instagram post or something Christine Quintana put, and she used the phrase "cracking the seal," and I really
Yes.
relate to that idea of like you just have to like get into it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've only written one play in my professional life so far, and that was on a fairly compressed timeline between, it was mix that I did with the Fringe New Play Prize, and between getting the Play Prize and being like, okay, it's gonna be a real thing, and then the production date 9 months later, I was like, I need to write a play. So, I mean, I would be like, I'd have, for that process, I would have a dramaturgy session every Tuesday, and then I'd like think and try to like be an adult the other 3 days, and then like, yeah, for 3 or 4 days, and doing too many other things at the same time. But you know, trying to like be an artist and like pay the bills and stuff, and then it would get to the weekend and be like, oh God, I need to write more.
Yes.
And so I used to rely on coffee shops, partly because my living situation wasn't great, but also I like it. I like it as a place. I mean, you can't procrasticate or procrasticlean
That's
if you're
true,
not
yeah,
at home. And so yeah, I would spend like whole weekends bouncing between coffee shops, and trying to find the ones with gluten-free meals. And yeah, and then also like for that process anyway, I would tend to have every once in a while I'd have like an almost entirely sleepless night where I'd just have ideas all night. I'd be like in a liminal state of like having images and then writing them in my phone and then trying to go to sleep and then keeping going. And so I'd have really productive times from just not sleeping at all, which is not a healthy, not a sustainable practice, and I don't recommend. And I'm certainly, you know, trying to figure out what is the more sustainable practice.
Have you found anything yet?
I mean, I feel like when you say, I know this will be the next thing, but shifting into like, how has your process changed during the cohort? Like, I feel like the circumstances of the world, for me anyway, have superseded the cohort. So it's more like, how has COVID and a global uprising in support of Black lives, like, changed the way I function in the world, which also changes the way I attempt to write, which is mostly a struggle these days, to be perfectly honest.
Yes, fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough. Great, thank you. Pipps?
Well, I related to Lili saying just the trying to be, or being an artist and paying the bills, because I feel like my days are different every day. Mm-hmm. No day is the same from the other in my life. I'm an actor, I'm a producer. I like for a long time worked one day at the front desk of a gym, and like I'm doing a bunch of other stuff, and then I have fringe shows, and then I have other obligations and relationships and things like that. So ultimately, my writing becomes sometimes a procrastination from the actual work I need to do.
Right.
Because I'm like, ugh, I have to do a bunch of admin emails. Like, I have to make an Excel doc. Barf. Like, not doing that. And I'll write a scene. And it usually happens quite quickly, like in very quick, like, oh God, and then it's
the anger
over.
we spoke of earlier.
Yeah, it just really just needs to like get on the out on the page.
Yeah.
Things that I find hard is like, if I get an audition, like I find it hard to focus on anything else because you're having to learn words and somebody else's words, and like, and I feel like auditions sometimes, like, and they come at you, like, out of your inbox, like, shit, fuck, oh, opportunity, but god damn it!
Yeah.
Just writing. So, very grateful, though, super grateful.
Super grateful.
Arts Club in there. No, so yeah, it's like, it's trying to manage all of those, and I really admire people who get up and write, like, early in the morning. That wasn't my style for a long time. It would be kind of like later at night after I've had a whole day to think about something, and then it'll kind of arrive. Sometimes I would go sit in a bar, but eventually you just get sick of someone being like, what are you writing, young lady? You're like, please leave me the fuck alone. But yeah, now I'm like trying to channel, and during COVID, the day kind of seems to be super short and then go on for a long time. So I have gotten up and started writing in the morning here and there, and it actually, before I do anything else, it's like tea and then write, and then I can think about it during the day a little bit and maybe go back to it. So I found that to be kind of cool. I'm like, channel Marcus Youssef. He like goes on a spin bike, like he wakes up at 5 and whatever. So sometimes I'm like, just channel what that is. Yeah. So it's it's hard.
I worked with this playwright once, and he was cursed with this thing. He couldn't get so far in his script because he was compulsively rewriting. So he would write a scene, and he couldn't write the next scene because he would go back and rewrite the first one. So he couldn't finish a draft because he just could not stop rewriting. So people kept saying, "Do you have a draft?" He's like, "No, it's not. I got to go back and fix it." So he found the way to get around that was to write a play in metrically perfect iambic pentameter, so that when he wrote a line, he was less inclined to change it.
Oh, because it took him so long to write.
It took him
one.
so long to get it in that metrically perfect iambic pentameter. And he wrote the entire play like that. So he invented an obstacle to overcome another obstacle. So we get this trick. So we all have these little tricks to kind of fool ourselves into forcing ourselves to generate work.
Well, one thing that I find, because I have the rewriting problem, and one of my fears is that it will never get workshopped, so I have to get it right. Because a
Get it
lot of the
perfect,
shows
you
that I see, and at least locally in Vancouver I'll find, where I've done things where they get to that process, because I love when we get together once a month and we read it, and I'm never more inspired than like, oh, I know exactly what needs to change, I know all of these things. And then for the rest of the month, it's just me workshopping it, and I suck. Like, I'm like, well, I wouldn't do it like that. Oh, man, how would you do? Oh, it is this back and forth with just me. And I have this sort of fear that, like, it'll just go up. Like, it'll go up how it is on the page, whereas, like, I love the collaborative aspect of playwriting. And it sucks that I go home, and then it's just like a solo business. Like, it's just me and my own like Etsy playwriting business that I run out of my home. And I make these crappy little plays.
Well,
And then maybe someone wants one.
when you mention collaborative, I feel like I should say like a lot of the shows that I've written have been co-written. Like I
Okay.
have so many co-writers that I've worked with and am working with, and in that sense, it's like you have an editor with you,
Right.
almost, if you have a good partnership.
Yes.
Which I've been lucky enough to have, and continue to have. But for me, you have to kind of be like, okay, well, you know, like one of my writing partners has 2 kids, so it's like, okay, well, you know, my kids go to bed, so that's when we write 7 to 10, and then we end up just doing it. And like sometimes it's more of a slog, but with 2 people, you can almost like, you could like commiserate together, like, oh, this scene is a slog, right? Yeah, my God. Yeah, so co-writing for me is a much more structured, makes a lot more sense, and generally you like hold each other accountable a little bit more. So that's always, I love co-writing.
Do you co-write?
So you're asking me?
Yeah.
It's funny because I was gonna say I'm almost the opposite, because I love to hear myself talk, and I love to hear these characters talk. And my problem is, co-writing is a great idea, and I've tried to find the right partners, but I haven't gotten there yet. But what I'm trying to do is stop listening to myself talk, because then I am stuck with this story that does all this shit, and I'm like, so I'm trying to learn how to, and this is where I think having a co-writer can really help, is you figure out, and I'm working with a story editor on a screenplay right now, who's kind of like, okay, let's not deal with the script, let's deal with the story, the outline, and like how you're getting to where you want to go, and how do you get from point A to point B to point C. And I think that's, for me, where having a partner is most helpful, right? Because for me, I just like to hear myself like, oh, that's so fun that they're having this conversation. And I'm just like, I'm like channeling it in from wherever, and I just think, no, because now I just have, with this process, you know, I thought it was going to be great to use this 80-page thing that I'd written over the course of a month, and now I just feel like I'm so stuck with it because I have so many babies in it, and it's not, and how do I like, I hate using this term, but how do I kill all the babies so I can get to the story that I want to actually tell? And that's where the challenge is with my
Right.
thing, which is, you know, I overgenerate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you wrote Mix by yourself, but Shawnee was part of the process. Is that correct? Like he was a partner?
Shawnee produced the show, so
Okay,
he
produced
wasn't
the show.
he wasn't part of the story process. But
Okay, I see.
we both we went in for the Fringe New Play Prize already being like, you'll produce it, and this is my show.
I see.
But I did when I was in studio. The first play I ever wrote was a co-written piece with Heather Barr, who now works as a stage manager all
Okay.
over. And it certainly is, it's helpful with the structure. It really helps to have someone else who you got to figure out the schedule with and to hold yourself accountable. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now, you've all, to some extent, talked about what you're writing about as very rooted in autobiography. Like you're all writing to some extent about your own experiences. And Erik, I would even argue.
Well, that weekend with death that I had.
But I would say by virtue of the fact that you're writing to talk about things that you don't want to talk about has a form of autobiography behind it. And I guess my question is, and I'll put this out to the group, is writing for theater inherently autobiographical? Does it have to be?
Oh, no, what I want to say is, for me, what I think is that the opportunity to sort of relive your younger years. So my characters are kind of coming of age, and for me, writing for theater helps me sort of relive a point in time. If I had done this, it's sort of like the thesis is, if I had done this with my life, this would have been the result. So it's autobiographical in a weird way where I throw different elements into not what happened in my life, but what if this happened to me, and also I was a woman, and also, you know, like, I definitely am not, it comes from an autobiographical impulse, but I also want to explore other people, so that kind of, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah.
For me, like, I go into that, like, very heady space of, like, what's this, Hero, Thousand Faces, all that sort of, like, anthropologically speaking, storytelling, like, it's...
Like monomyth, sort of?
Yeah, where it's like everything has been told before,
Right.
and we're just recreating Star Wars and all that nonsense. Joseph Campbell, thank you. That's like that type of thing, where it's almost this like nature versus nurture literary thing for me, where it's like, how could I write something that isn't from me? Like even when I'm writing someone else's story, it's my points of view. Like I'm doing a Christmas Carol adaptation thing right now, and it's this whole like I'm taking Scrooge's side in certain parts where I'm like, yeah, I don't really like Christmas. Like, how do I write? What is it like to write this thing now about a person who loves Christmas and a person who doesn't like Christmas and all of this stuff? And I'm still writing this like Charles Dickens story of this, and everybody knows this story. And I feel like sometimes even the most personal things that have happened to me, I go, this has happened to someone else. This story has been told before. How do I find a new way of doing it? But the more I try not to be someone else and just do what I do, then that's where I find that I'm writing from my own experience, and hopefully it's unique.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to keep saying it's until someone jumps in.
Oh.
So.
Do you want to talk about autobiography?
I mean, for me, I certainly think it always will be in
Yeah.
some way,
Yeah.
rooted in autobiography. I don't know if that's true of all theater. I don't know that, I mean, like, sir, I hear what you're saying in terms of, like, you can't help but have yourself mixed up in what you're doing, but maybe it's just that I feel like or just from my perspective so far in what I've done has been quite explicitly about like my literal thing, literal journeys of like unpacking, which I think is not what all writers do. It's just like people do different things and people are interested in different things and write for different reasons. Like for me, writing is such a primary way that I have to process. That it's sort of inevitable that it's that what I do is very close to me. Whereas I don't think that's true for everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve, you said something on, I think it was either our interview or our very first thing together as a group was, I can't remember whose quote it was, but the idea that every author and playwright is just rewriting the same story.
Yeah.
And they're just doing it different each time. And like even looking at themes of things that I write is kind of the same stuff coming back and over and over and over again. And I don't know if anyone else has that, where you feel like there are overarching themes, not just through a story or through characters, but just through your canon as a writer. Does anyone else have something like that?
What that really makes me think of is like, are we really that different from the toddlers we were, the teenagers we were, or who we are now? So I think that's how I hear that question, I guess, is like, do we really change a lot? I guess opinions can change over time, but like what we think about in ourselves, you know? So I think that's how I interpret that. So maybe not, or maybe yes. But autobiographically, I think for me, I feel like right now, I guess, and like the shows that I've written are like, I take little like snippets of like embarrassments, or like the one right now is like so much inspiration from like being like just like in your 20s, and like the garbage fire of your 20s is just so hot, and there's just so much to pull from.
As someone early in their 20s.
Oh man, I feel bad for you. Just wait until wait until it gets to like the Jupiter rising, or what is it called?
Oh, we've been in Mercury retrograde this past 3 months.
Yeah.
That's why everything's fucked.
Yeah.
Not only.
Yeah, no, there's a thing that happens. There's a thing that happens around 28, 29 for a lot of people, and it is not fun. Yeah, I don't know. So I think that like I take those little things because I've had some space from them, so I like to kind of revisit them and make fun of myself.
Right.
But yeah, and like look back on like certain stupidities or like opinions, and how I've like kind of grown out of some of those, and then I'm sure in another few years I'll be like, well, their 30s are a real garbage fire or whatever. Although I really hope not.
I just wanted to hop back for a sec to like this. We had sort of touched on universality, because I get that idea like fundamentally, but I also think as writers of color right now, like it's both a struggle and also exciting to be like, well, a lot of what we see in Western theater is not our stories whatsoever. And yes, we can all relate to like fundamental human problems, but there's so much that has not even been touched in the experience of people of color on stages in this in these lands, in the world we live in right now, you know? And so I think it's important not to overlook that, because it's so easy for like the idea of neutral and whiteness to and what gets on stage to all come together, and for us to like, well, yeah, for white people to forget that many of the many experiences have not even been put on stage yet, are just now starting to, which is really exciting and frustrating that it has taken this long. But I think what kind of feeds me is looking at how can I point out to audiences that, at least in this city, are often very white, the differences between my experience and their experience, between various people's experiences and their experience, in order to like wake people up to the fact that it's not that their experience, that wealthy white people's experience is not the default.
Yes.
And is not the default of what deserves to be talked about.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to note.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that there's a commonality within finding those differences, that we can go, I know what you're talking about, and I can I'm talking about arriving at empathy.
Yes,
You know what
I
I
mean,
mean?
again, like fundamentally, I think
Yeah.
yes, we can all. There are human universal truths
Yeah,
for
right.
sure.
Yeah.
But looking at, identifying the differences
Yes.
in experience based on who you are, and identity is one way to put it, like one part of it, I think is at this point in like looking at how art and politics collide, I think that is more generative than being,
Yeah.
for me. Anyway,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
my approach as an artist, is identifying the differences so that we can be real with each other and then get to empathy.
Yeah. Lili, you brought up a really good point. One of my questions was, how has your workflow changed since being part of the cohort? You made a really good point, is that the cohort's kind of mixed up in all this stuff that's going on in the world today, and it can be difficult to go, I don't know what's the cause of this change in the way I do things now. It might be this, it might be this, it might be that, things are a garbage fire, I'm not sure. So I guess the question I would put forward is, how do you see your work evolving before you now? You don't have to say because of what reason, but how do you see it evolving?
It's hard. I think we all just kind of pause there because I think we're all still right in the middle of
Right,
it.
yeah.
And it's like, fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, part of me is like going, God, now I have such a different outlook. We all have a shared different outlook, I think, on just how we could, the fact that we had to come here with masks and we have to think about everything when we leave our house that we just, for the most part, didn't have to think about before. And I think, is my work trivial because I had a certain lens that I don't now. I have a there's a lot of things that I've learned even through just empathy of living in, this circumstance, and also from my perspective, like being homeless and how privileged I am just to have be able to have an apartment and a roof over my head, and the fact that I have a space to call my own, to hide from the virus or whatever is, like some fundamental things for me is what I'm dealing with in my own life, and like how do I apply them to my stories, or do I, or so, yeah, and so it's a hard answer right now because I feel like I'm still in the middle of it.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing to note is that we're losing artists too. Like, the first time ever, I know friends who are like leaving the theater, and for the first time ever, I'm going, yeah, I don't blame you. Like, I'm not going, don't go. I'm going, yeah, I get it. Like, I get why you're leaving. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and that's a really interesting place to be at, because of what's going on in the world and how what's going. Like, we can't really make shows right now.
There's all sorts of things that, if I speak to my own personal experience in terms of playwriting, composing, is like, even when it comes to COVID-19, and I was talking with a young guy I know who does screenwriting, and he was like, do I mention it? Do I mention it? Is it
Yeah,
so
right.
much a part of the zeitgeist
Yes.
now that I mention it? And then what you said that resonated with me, Lili, is the idea of when I see socially what's going on in the world, and you even saying like so much of the material in the Western canon of theater is so white-centric that I go, is the storytelling that I'm doing, because I'm thinking of the group of teens in my story, and we talk about that, and even my voice and the space that I'm taking, there's the part of me that really has to take, like, I'm taking pause and going, and we always ask this as writers, like, why am I writing this? Why here? Why now? Why this? And also now I'm beginning to question, as a playwright, the space that I'm taking as well.
You're right.
Because it's my vocation, it's what I do. But there's also the part of me is like, how do I can't write what I don't know. Like, there are I play thought experiments, and those are the things I write about what I don't know, but there are experiences I can't pretend to know, or empathize, or I can try and empathize and try and understand, but there are things that I can't really write about, and then it takes me to the place of, it feels so trivial to write something, and especially when it comes to musical theater, where there's levity to it, there's all of these things, and for me looking at the idea of, I love entertainment for the sake of entertainment, but right now as a writer, I feel like it's just not something that deserves to take space right now. Whereas like entertainment can be a tool to bring a message that's important. And Where I'm starting to make a shift in my writing is taking things where I'm so used to adapting stories and them being what's been done, and then really taking it to what is the autobiographical part of me? What is the thing where I have to be brave and tell parts that make me uncomfortable, so it's worth taking space on a stage and to have audiences take something away. So it can be entertaining as a tool to get them to listen, but it feels like such a waste of time right now to do entertainment just for the sake of entertainment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. As a white settler living on stolen land and writing like a white character and now a white family, I feel I know that the story that I'm telling has a newer lens. Like, it was really climate change focused, and now this new draft, I kind of want to examine these conversations that are happening in white families, and for me, that's kind of like the work I'm doing as a white person that I want to layer into the show, and I want, white audiences to feel like they can kind of have an in somehow and understand something deeper and kind of see this intergenerational, like this 28-year-old daughter and this 18-year-old son have these conversations with their 60-plus-year-old parents. And those conversations are happening all over right now. And so for me, during this time, I've really, I've dug into family and how really, really icky conversations happen in families and in those private spaces. So I'm really, that's kind of where I've taken the show and where I want it to exist. Because as Erik said, I don't want to have a desire to write an experience that I don't necessarily live. I feel like I can write people in my family right now, or inspirations, and I can write a white family right now, and that's where I'm at. And I think those are the sticky, gross, horrible conversations that happen. I want those to be in the show. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna ask you what the question was again. After I have one thought, and then I want to go back to what the question was. But we've seen so many theater companies coming out with all these statements about being in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and commitments to inclusivity, and I feel both with theater companies and with artists, especially once some time has passed and we see seasons being announced again, and we see creators putting up new work, that's going to be the real tell of whether that talk meant anything. As soon as we get back in theaters and we're seeing who's getting hired again, who's getting hired to direct things, all these, and who's getting hired into positions of power, I found all these statements very frustrating because I'm almost primed to be how are you going to disappoint? Especially when it was so fresh on the tail of everything that was happening around George Floyd and the deaths of other people right around that same time. And I think it goes for artists too. If you've been posting all this in solidarity stuff through this time, and then you write another play that doesn't touch any of this stuff, that is just entertainment for entertainment's sake, then you're showing how much you actually care. And I really do believe in you're either writing something to advance the movement or you're supporting the status quo. I don't think there's an in-between. And I think we're gonna see who's placing themselves where very quickly once theater can exist a bit more again. But what was your question? Was it how?
You just reminded me of a quote from an older white guy, albeit, but Peter Brook said, the proof is not in the pudding, but in the eating.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can talk good, but let's see what happens later. Yeah. My question was, how do you see your work evolving currently, given everything that's going on right now?
Right. I don't know. I mean, my mix was based on In 2016, Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were two black men who were killed within 2 days of each other. And it was those events that really woke me up to the reality of my blackness and the embodied ancestral reality of my blackness. And it was those events sending me on trying to figure out what it meant to be mixed for the next, 3 years after that led to me writing that piece. So for myself, I feel like, this has already been the work I've been doing, because it's my own to unpack. And so for me, it's been like in writing these pieces right now, it's been struggling to figure out, both with COVID and with coping with the grief of everything that has been happening, how to find structure and how to balance, resisting a capitalist urge to just keep pushing when your body is not there, and when you actually need to rest and be with, when I actually need to rest and be with my grief, with the reality, which is, and this is, I think, a practice as an artist of continuing to do the thing, even when it is hard. And so, what is the balance of honoring those two things is just a question I'm still sitting with.
Right.
Yeah.
It might take time to have perspective. Like something that I feel like is coming up again and again is perspective, and having the now that I'm in my 30s, I can see my 20s, and maybe we need some time outside of this shitstorm to see what it is, to see how we're coping with it. The last thing I want to ask about is where are you in the plays that you're writing right now, and how are they going? Because we haven't actually talked a whole lot about them. Erik, you talked a little bit about yours.
Self-Loathing. It's
Close by return.
well, I'm at that place where I reach everything, and I think I said this at the last meeting, where I feel like everything is crap.
Yeah.
I'm falling back on research, which is what I do. What's tricky for me, and where I've shot myself slightly in the foot, is I'm doing the music and the book, which generally you have a composer and you have a book writer, and they work together and they collaborate, and collaborating is wonderful. I'm doing both things and working in a style of music that is unfamiliar to me. I'm working with a lot of electronic music and very sort of like club, what the kids are listening to right now. Jesus. So I'm trying to educate myself on, even just because I'm trained as a pianist, a classical vocalist, and I play lots of other instruments, but now I'm doing YouTube tutorials every day on how to make beats and use all of my MIDI and my synth and these things, because that is the sound. Where I've come in now is I have a story, and because it's a musical, I have to honor what the sound of this story is and what sound is best going to progress the story. And it's what these kids, what these teens live in, as far as my story goes, and then also what the character of Death and what they bring into this mix is like as well. So I'm in this place of trying to marry music and story together, and feeling like I'm trying to get a grasp on what the music is. So I feel like an old person being like, oh, let's do some of the hip and the hop, and I feel old in this style of music but then I also, it's that do I stick to what I know and then make a musical score that is somewhere where I live in, more musical theater, classic music, the genres I'm familiar with, but then going, this story needs something else, and then do I reach out to someone else to help collaborate with, or can I do it myself? And that's what I'm exploring.
That demo of that super driving pop song that you showed us was really good.
It was pretty good.
I appreciate that. That was just watching videos on YouTube. You can do this, where teenagers videotape themselves having raging house parties. So I've been watching that. You can't go to house parties. You just watch it on YouTube. You can't go to house parties with teens and Daniel Day-Lewis but I'm sure everyone here has bizarre, and every writer has a bizarre and varied search history and sort of YouTube watch list that would make no sense if
Yeah,
the
right.
CSI Criminal Minds team had to look at
Right.
what's wrong with
Yeah,
you.
it's forensic this.
Yeah.
Pips, I want to talk just a little bit about
Yeah.
your journey, because you're starting to write a whole new play.
Kind of,
You're
yeah.
halfway through the year, and you're restarting.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah, sort of.
There's echoes, but
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I just started to realize that the conversations and the arguments, it's really like the arguments and like the meat that I wanted to get to was getting stuck in exposition. So the character, like, and I didn't want any of the characters to be like, before, none of them knew each other.
yeah.
And they're all in this new space and they don't know each other, which sounds like, ooh, what's gonna happen? Which is true. But for the kind of conversations that I wanted to have happen, and also I felt like there's a level of absurdity that I write with that wasn't being served in my previous setting.
Right.
So I've changed the setting. The kind of like lead character is the same. A bit older actually, and instead of strangers, it's her family, and
Right.
it's her two parents and her sibling. So it's shifted, and I feel like the archetypes of the characters are kind of similar. Like
Right.
there's some
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
similarities there, but for me, like in talking about climate change, I was like, talk, like, whoa, like it's just like, ugh. So I was like, what's the action, you know? And then I just thought of like, you know, what everyone is saying is like, it's fucking happening. Like we're in it now, and like no one knows, like no one feels it. So I decided to have the natural disaster occur in their family home. So like Hurricane Mona is like the daughter Mona, and through a family argument, like right before the intermission, because we're on a fault line, a fucking volcano like bursts through the dining room table and like a hurricane, and they're all like sitting in it, and they still try and have dinner and stuff, and like what are they gonna do now that the disaster's in their home?
You know what's awesome about that is that you're not writing it going, how are we going to pay for this? Like, you know what I
No,
mean?
no,
You're not
not
like,
at
just
all,
like,
no.
just write it.
No, I mean, it's
Look
Arts
at-
Club.
Yeah, we have tons of money right now.
God, well, the arts are really rolling in right now. Shit, maybe I should rethink this. Yeah, so for me, like that was a way for me to like get to the heart of the story and to make it physically happen to
Yeah.
people, and to go like, now that it's happening in your family home, what are you gonna do? And it like, I keep going back to this like moment when I was like a young activist, climate activist, and I would like cover myself in molasses and like crawl along the beach and like pretend to die, and then like one like scientist would be like, so the effects of one, like I'm sure most people at home, especially right-wing people, are like, look at these fucking idiots like covered in oil down by the... But I remember one of the activists who I worked with, we were like out for drinks, and he was like, I wish there was a tanker spill right here in BC. Like maybe I should cause it. And I was like, whoa. I was like, that's so interesting. And so for me, it's like, what are the extremes that get people to actually recognize something? Like when you can't look away any longer, what do you do? And so right now I'm at the point where I don't know what they're gonna do once the thing happens in their home, but I'm writing towards that now.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, Lili, your process has been writing scenes, and you weren't even quite sure what order they were in some respects, and it was very much rooted in again autobiography and in your childhood experience. Am I correct? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the show I'm writing is based on my experiences growing up in social housing, in BC housing. And so pulling on a lot of things I personally went through, and also trying to reflect the real diversity of people who live in social housing, and the relationships, and how people are very interconnected and very isolated at the same time, and the central, I mean, the idea is rooted in, like when I was young, there was a bed bug. I mean, bed bugs had resurged in Vancouver, and in my building it got pretty bad. And seeing the way my mom dealt with it, the way people in the building dealt with it, and for me, in the last few years, I've dealt with other things like pantry moths and like awful, like, luckily in none of these situations I've never had it really, really bad, but it's been enough for me it's a real metaphor for how we manifest, how anxiety physically manifests, and how mental health can physically manifest around you. It seems like these things always happen at the same time, like right when you're going through a rough mental health time, you have pantry moths, and everything is awful. And so I with this piece I've been writing it pretty non-linearly, and then kind of going back and piecing it together to get an arc happening. And so now I'm at the point where I kind of know where it's going, and I feel pretty confident in what I've got in sort of the first chunk. But I was thinking today about feedback from an earlier session where you said, so what is the bed bug metaphor? Like how does it sort of come out? And I'm like, right, that is the stat. That is the sort of crux of the thing right now, is I've sort of set that up, but I need to know how that explodes.
Right.
And what it means.
Yeah.
I need to figure out what my play means. That's the point of that.
Yeah, that's a good place to be. And Justin, your piece is again very personal, about a young Indigenous man trying to access a connection to his ancestry, right?
Well, no,
To some extent.
yeah. I mean, I'm wrestling. No, it's funny because I am wrestling with that, and and I also do tend to get them confused when you work on multiple stories. It's like, no, that's this story. This story is what's happening, and I think my thing is I'm more interested with this story, I think, is to deal with mental health issues that he has, that he's trying to, I'm trying to infuse the magic of theater into this show, because when I wrote this draft, I felt like I was so plot driven with it that there are some things because of writing in the different genres and writing for TV and film, you don't get to do a lot of exposition, right?
Yeah.
You have to but some of the magic of going to the theater is uncovering a story through exposition, if it's done well and written well, and the actors are, like there's a magic that you have in theater that you sometimes just can't pull off in the other genres. And so what I'm trying to do is just put myself out there in the audience and look objectively at this story, and knowing that I'm a miserable piece of shit that gets so oh God, I just don't like this show right now, and I'll sit through so much theater and just hate it. And so that doesn't help me at all as that sort of critical mind, and I'm just watching my play just fuck no, I'm not, but so you got to get to that point where you're objective, okay, now you're just being mean to yourself. So, looking at the story as written and how it's kind of put out on the canvas of the outline, and and committing to it. And I think there's a lot of it too where it's it's okay, we can rewrite, and I find that I'm kind of it's not like I'm gonna go to jail or something, I'm not gonna be, I'm not gonna be a failure. It's gonna be okay, right? Yeah. So where I am right now is, just taking the essence of this story, and I feel like that's why I'm excited for tomorrow when we get to go through my pages, because I really like this scene, and I feel like it's the only inspired stuff in this play. But so it'll be interesting to hear it, and that's why I love this program, so we get to have other people read our work and not just be the self-hating person.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We don't get to make theater right now, so we spend a lot of time talking about it, and like maybe kind of like going back in behind closed doors and like conspiring a little bit. I heard this thing a while ago that during World War One, Russian filmmakers weren't allowed to make films because all the film stock was seized for the war effort. Right. And so all the filmmakers would just sit around for years and talk about film. That's all they did. They weren't allowed to make it. So then when they were allowed to make it again, there was this tremendous surgence, and some of the best Russian films were made when they were finally allowed to do it. So my hope is that conversations like this will yield great things when we're finally allowed to put it on stage and finally allowed to workshop and put bodies to our words. I hope. One of the best things right now is that we can have conversations like this. Thank you all so very much. You're all incredibly smart people. It's so awesome to be here in the room with you in person and not in Zoom. Zoom's great, but it's so nice to be here in person. And thank you all so much for joining us. And enjoy the rest of the work throughout the week in Dialed Up. You'll see it all week long. Thanks so much.
The Arts Club Emerging Playwrights Unit is an initiative that was launched last year, where we invite 4 emerging or early career playwrights to work on their script for an entire year with the Arts Club. Part of that year is also spent at the Banff Center. And this program is generously sponsored by Bonnie Ma, who is a longtime generous patron and supporter of the Arts Club, as well as the Banff Center and Howard Jang. Thank you so much for your contribution. Dialed Up and all of the digital content that you're seeing this week is generously sponsored by BMO and IA Financial Group.